How's going, guys? Whew, I feel like it's been so long since I've made one of these should you pull videos. Jesus Christ, the whole void period of reruns and CCs. Like, I feel like there's only content whenever we get like IS or a new operator now. Like even like hopefully some new stages as well. But like to me, CC is just like usually just one big map and then like a few side maps, and there's just not that much of it content in my opinion. So yeah, that period felt pretty void for me, to be honest. So finally we are getting a new banner, so more reason for me to make videos, and obviously we will be starting with should you pull this banner. Now, the difficult part about this banner is not if I should recommend you guys to pull or not. Like, obviously this is a must pull banner. I'll just say that outright, right? But like, how do you pronounce her name? So I don't want to make this too big of a deal, but I will say that I've been practicing how to say her name for the past 5 days, and I even asked like a specialist in this area who can actually speak German to teach me how to pronounce her name, and he made like a whole video, so hopefully I can pronounce her name properly. And her name is Degenbrecher, if I said that correctly. I hope so. Please forgive me if I didn't, but from now on I will just call her Degen because I'm a degenerate and that's the best way I can pronounce that. So that being said, since I've already given you guys the answer of should you pull this banner, I guess we can go on to talk about why that is the case. And here she is, our third 6-star Swordmaster. And looking at our previous 2 6-star Swordmasters, which was Chen in First Year of Arknights and Irene, which, both of them had their moments. Chen was like, oh, skill 2 instance usage. And then Irene was like knocking up enemies into the air and then doing AoE damage. But, both of them it kind of fell off eventually just because of one thing. SP on attack. And I think that's what really separates Degen apart from those two. But we'll talk about that later because we'll have to talk about the talents first. Now, I don't want to go through the module first because I'm going to assume there are going to be some people like that don't have the resource to go module. So we'll talk about non-module first and then we'll talk about the module later. So before module, her first talent, when she's dealing attack, there's a 10% chance for her attack to increase to 160%, goes up to 165% at pot 3. And with module goes up to 175% plus potential, plus module level 3. So the extra 10% you get from module level 3 isn't that big of a deal. It's something else that really matters. And in the end, it's a gradual increase, not a sudden increase from level 1 to level 3. Her second, also her first talent, when dealing that 10% attack chance, enemies will be, I would call it disarm. I don't think there's an official translation yet, so I just call it disarm. They will be disarmed for 5 seconds. And the effect of disarm is that when the enemies have the debuff and they are blocked, they cannot deal normal attack. And how I would differentiate enemies attack, normal attack, and skill, which is non-normal attack, is I would look at the enemy's description. Usually, when you look at the description, there's like a whole bunch of like several paragraphs of what the enemies can do, right? Those are all skills, in my opinion. And everything that's not written in there are normal attacks. There are some exceptions. Some of those will say, let's say as an example, when dealing normal attack, there is some special effect. Those also count as normal attack because they specified it's a normal attack within the description. So they can no longer deal normal attack for 5 seconds. And there are some people that has done the math on it, so I don't want to do the math myself again, but apparently it's got a 55% coverage duration. So someone did a whole simulation of 1 million seconds, and out of that 1 million seconds, about 55% of the duration, they were debuffed. So it's a rough calculation. Take it as it is. Now, her second talent is that when she's attacking an enemy that is being disarmed, she will ignore 25% of the enemy's defense. That goes up to 30% at potential 5. So this combination of her talent 1 and talent 2 just works perfectly with each other and greatly increases her survivability and damage capability. Now, the module. The module increases one trait that is very simple yet very powerful. The damage dealt by her skills increased by 10%. Now, this 10% is multiplicative. So, assuming you have like a ton of buff dealt like onto her, right? And you have all these other things, all these buffs, and they all multiply by, let's say, her skill skill percentage. And then after all the calculation is done and reducing the enemy's defense and whatnot, and then that final damage is multiplied to gain another 10%. So it works really well with any kind of buff, and it's just a great trait to have. So this is why module level 1 is the most significant increase, but at module level 3 it's still a great increase. A bit of a spoiler, with everything maxed out, her skill 3, one charge of her skill 3 can instantly deal 39,000 damage, which is just crazy, and it's like such a short burst as well. But we'll talk about that later because that's with the skills, and which is what we're going to be going on to. Skill 1 first though. So her skill 1 is, as usual, attack to gain SP. And basically at that moment, I think it's fair to say that this is a skip for most people, but I'll just talk about what happens when you M3 it. So at M3, the skill cost goes down from 5 to 3, and she can deal up to 220% of her attack as physical damage twice to surrounding enemies, 6 surrounding enemies. So yes, you can use this as a AFK skill, but I just don't think that you should be doing so anyway, because like there are so many operators beforehand that we could have already done these kind of usages. I don't really think like just choosing her just for that is really worth it. And if you're aiming for the disarm, the second and third skill are also better because there's no actual like effect on skill 1 with the disarm debuff, while skill 2 and skill 3 does. So let's talk about skill 2. So skill 2 is when you activate the skill, and attack to generate SP, by the way. When you activate the skill, deal at most deal 2 attacks towards enemies that is in front of her, which is the 3 tiles in front of her and the 2 tiles to the side of her. 5 enemies or up to 6 enemies at M3, and deals 2 attacks to them. Each attack is equivalent to up to 310% of her attack as physical damage, and if the enemy is blocked, that turns into 3 hits. And the chance of talent activation is increased to 100%. That means guaranteed disarm. And yes, that is why skill 2 is way better for control, because what you can do basically is you can just keep attacking for her normal attack to disarm enemies, and then the moment they're about to attack, you see their attack animation raising their enemy raising their hand up, activate skill 2, instant disarm, and you can just keep controlling the enemy. This is why I think skill 2 is a really important skill, and we'll talk about the usage down the road, but just because of that, it's a pretty good skill when you're just trying to like stall a boss, as an example, because the bosses will always be there and you can just keep attacking, so there's no worry for SP regen, and then you can just choose when you want to stall, when you want to debuff the boss so they can't attack. You can use her to block it, the boss, or you can put her on the side of a defender, so the defender is the one tanking, and then she's just aiding when it comes to defense. So that is a really handy skill, but nothing compared to skill 3, because skill 3 is truly the best skill. So skill 3, she will deal 10 attacks within an area, and each area will hit at most 6 enemies, dealing up to 235% of her attack as physical damage, and the talent activation chance is increased to 100%. Plus, she will continuously pull enemies towards her with a medium amount of force. And then after the 10 hits, at last she will deal 1 more extra damage that is equivalent to 330% of her attack as physical damage, and pull enemies in with a greater force. So there are several applications when it comes to this skill. First of all, like I said, it's an instant like not instant, it's a roughly 5-second skill to dish out all the attacks because it still takes time. But during that 5 seconds, she can still block enemy. She is invincible. So unlike Chen's skill 3 where she is invincible but she can't block enemies, with Degen she can actually block and being invincible, which is like really OP in my opinion. Plus, the pulling effect might sound not as significant, but you can use it to cancel enemies' attack animation, and just, even though technically speaking they aren't like, maybe they're range attack, they're range enemies and they aren't being blocked, and hence the disarm effect isn't really affecting them, so they're still attacking. But because you're pulling them in, and most range enemies do tend to have lower weight anyway, so you can just pull them in and then cancel their attack animation. Plus, if enemies are like, if there's so many enemies, or if there are unblockable enemies, right, her pulling enemies in will also stop enemies from leaving her attack area, which is just so good, and it saved my life so many times. And I think it's just like, it might not sound like a huge deal next to her like great attack, like 39,000 damage within, I think, less than 5 seconds actually. I think it's more like 4.7 seconds if I recall correctly. Don't quote me on that because I think I heard it somewhere. But like such high DPS, but the pulling effect is also quite significant and helps with the survivability of not just her, but the whole team. And what can I say? It's a really strong skill that takes, if you really calculate the skill circulation, it's a 30-second cooldown plus 5-second duration skill. So each time she casts the skill, it's a 35-second gap between each skill. So when you calculate something similar for Minar, his skill lasts 28 seconds, but his skill takes 42 seconds to cool down. That's a 70-second I forgot the word. Cycle. While Degen is more like a 35-second cycle. So that half the time for her skill to come back, in my opinion, makes her way more flexible, and you can just like more freely just spam her skill. While when it comes to Minar, if you like misuse his skill and then like there's a huge wave coming just as his skill ends, you're kind of screwed and you start over, right? Degen, you don't really have to worry about that. And so like, even though technically speaking within the same duration of like within the same 70 seconds, she might not deal as much damage when it comes like compared to Minar, ignoring all the normal attacks. But in general, I just feel like she's just a more flexible and just, she feels better to use, you know? And that's why I truly think that Degen is on the same level as Minar, and I actually use her quite a bit more than Minar when it comes to some specific modes. And that is actually what we should talk about next. In normal mode, right? In normal events and like say main story, like I said, because she dishes out so much damage so quickly, she can kill like most mobs and even most elites if you have some aid from like Skadi Alter or something. Skadi Alter's skill 2 just sitting on the field, and she would just buff Degen's attacks by so much, because not only her skill 3 is like a huge multiplication, but also her talent effect is also, her first talent is also taking effect, and then there's also the extra trait from the module. All of these are multiplying by each other, so you're actually getting an exponential effect for when it comes to buffs that she's like receiving. So she works really well with buffs, and then with Skadi Ultra skill 2, she's just gonna kill most elite and mobs like with one charge of her skill. And then even against bosses, 39,000 damage is it's quite significant as well. So in normal event stages, I would say she's just like top tier, and like just bring her, just brain dead, you win, right? But also she works really well in CC in theory, and like even though technically speaking we are looking like at CN stuff because CN is like 2 CC ahead of us, but like the ability to just ignore defense makes her so much better when it comes to CC, because a lot of the times you're choosing tags that would decrease your attack, and then like a lot of physical damage enemies just can't deal enough damage. But she doesn't have to worry about that, because not only does her have great attack per sec, like damage per second, DPH, and then she also has to ignore defense. So even if the defense is lowered, even if the attack is lowered by a bit, she can still like penetrate through enemies' defense and deal like significant amount of damage. Plus, she has a chance to be used in stall teams because of her disarm ability debuff, right? Wait, how many enemies? I think there's not that many enemies that has resistance against this debuff, just because of how new it is. And so like when it comes to CCs that are mostly using enemies from prior events, like she's just gonna be so good against all of them, not only in dealing damage but also perma controlling them. So I think like Degen is just such a great operator, to like such an all-rounder in those sense. And my favorite part, IS, she's a no-brainer, trust me. She is my favorite IS4 starter. In fact, not like, doesn't need to be E2. Even at E1, her skill 2 is just so good. Remember how her skill 2, you can choose when to activate it, and then she will just like disarm the enemy? Well, you can disarm Gopnik and the dog, and hence she is actually great at dealing with them. And even the emergency maps, as long as you time her skill 2 correctly, she will like clear most of the high risk enemies with ease. And then like as long as you know like the enemies that you must deal with her normal attack, there's no threat for like the first 2-3 floors. And then down the road, even in like later floors, her total damage is so significant that you will still use her to deal with a lot of the mobs, and she will do the job perfectly, because like I said, her attack is just so high DPS. It really matters. And then even in endings, in IS4 ending 1, she can deal with the boss plus a lot of the mobs on the left side because she hits 6 with her skill 3. In ending 2, because of her skill 3, being able to hit air units, she can clear the drones, clear a lot of the mobs all easily, and then you can just focus on tanking the boss. And in ending 3, because of you only have such a short period of time to deal damage towards the boss in ending 3, and her skill 3 does all that damage within 5 seconds. The burst is actually so good for that boss, actually better than Minar in my opinion. And so she's just an all-rounder when it comes to IS4. Plus, if you have some sort of attack speed collectible, you can just make her guarantee to disarm the enemy. So you can use her to actually block bosses if you want to. Like, that's actually a spoiler. So you can use her for like way more consistent blocking enemy like crowd controls. And if you have like some sort of damage because of how well her skills like just scales with any buff, if you have any attack buff collectibles, well, that also buffs her skill 3 easily, because that's just the nature of her skill and how the calculation is done. So like, I don't know, man. I really don't understand like how I can possibly not recommend her at all. And I think at this point, you guys all see like why I'm pushing, like why I'm recommending her so hard. But that being said, I don't think there's actually more I can add to this. So that would be the end of this video. Leave a comment down below to tell me if you are pulling her or not, especially if those of you who aren't pulling for her. I would really like to know why. Maybe because you're like, you've got some other operators down the road that you have in your mind, like limited operators or something like that, or if you have like some other specific reasons. And if you are pulling her, well, are you pulling for P2 like me? Because I would say the cost in like the DP cost of her is really in my opinion, the only downside of her is just her costing a bit too much. So you see I have pot 2 here and she's still 22 DP. So at pot 1 she's 23 DP to deploy, while Minar is so much cheaper. So are you going for potentials? And that would be it from me for today. And I think I'll be seeing you guys when the banner comes out. Yes, I will be making a pull video. Hopefully I will be getting good pulls this time. And I'll see you guys then. Bye.